I put the binocular on it, and I can see it spinning around, and I wouldn't bet my life on it being the S4B, but it sure's got to be something like it.
That was Gene Cernan reporting that sighting. Orbit.
We were that first crew that was going to get a chance to fly this vehicle and test this vehicle that was going to take human beings to the moon.
Mankind makes one giant leap and lands the first man on the moon. A historic achievement for the human race. But that giant leap took many lunges, trips, and falls in order for our astronauts to actually achieve this moment. And along the way, many space researchers have speculated that our astronauts may have seen UFOs and anomalous structures on the surface of the moon.
You know, it's a very interesting little document from 1950. There was a Canadian government official named Wilbert Smith, and he was very interested in these flying saucers. Wilbert Smith was a real smart guy. He was an engineer, he was a scientist, and he had a kind of a mid-upper level position in the Canadian bureaucracy. And he was able to go down to Washington, D.C. In September 1950 to the Canadian embassy there, and while he was hanging around D.C., he goes and talks to some American scientists, and one in particular. And this was a scientist who was very well plugged in. And this man's name was Robert Sarbacher, we learned many years later. It was very, very powerful. Sarbacher says, yes, flying saucers do exist. I can confirm that for you. Their modus operandi is unknown, but the United States government considers this the most classified subject of all, 2 levels higher than the hydrogen bomb, which in 1950 was about as big as you could get. But flying saucers were higher than that. So Smith types up this memo for his supervisors in the Canadian government. And that's that. But actually, that wasn't that, because years after he died, his private papers were analyzed, and the exact name of that scientist was written there, and that scientist, Robert Sarbacher, was still alive. And researchers found him, and Sarbacher confirmed the whole thing. He said, yeah, that actually did happen. So anyway, my point simply is, you've got very clear knowledge among the highest circles in Washington back in 1950, for example, and in the military back in 1950, that yes, absolutely, UFOs were the most sensitive subject out there. Now, ask yourself, why would that be? You know, why would that be the most sensitive subject if it was all nonsense and hallucinations and hoaxes and things like this, you know? Well, obviously, it's a lot more than that. And when you go through the declassified literature, such that we have, there's still a lot we don't have, but we have enough to show very, very clearly that you had countless violations of sensitive airspace by objects that did not look normal, that were doing things that were not supposed to be possible over places that you were never supposed to go. All right, whether that means over Los Alamos, you know, where the scientists developed the atomic bomb, or the Hanford nuclear plant in the state of Washington, which was a major plutonium processing facility, a lot of toxic waste there to this day, or over the Oak Ridge nuclear, facility in Tennessee, where, again, a great deal of science on the atomic bomb was developed. All of these very sensitive places, you don't just go hang out over them, but UFOs were hanging out over them. And, jets would be sent to intercept. In one case, we know of anti-aircraft battalions were alerted. Can you imagine if the public knew about this at the time? They didn't. They didn't find out until years and years later, after these documents were declassified. By then, they were just sunk into the black hole of the public memory. And, no one really seemed to care. But back in 1950, if these incidents had become known, I think people would have cared quite a bit. They were very important. My point here simply is this. The subject of UFOs has always been considered to be of the highest level of security classification that we know of. And so now if you've got NASA engaged in any capacity with the United States military on any type of classified mission that it engages in, there is no way ever that they're just going to tell the world, oh, look, there are all these UFOs, people. How cool is that? No, that'll never happen. That will never happen until the laws change. And those laws haven't changed. The subject still remains highly classified, even well into the 21st century. It is, we can talk a little bit more about it now than, say, a few years ago. That's interesting and that's true. But there's still a red line, and thou shalt not go over that red line.
It was one of these clear days, and that's why I was up, because you could see to infinity, and it was an ideal day for aerial photography. And it appeared silver with a shadow underneath, as though it was metallic, and it was moving at a rate of speed, I would say 150 miles an hour, plus or minus, and appeared to be maybe 20 meters across.
We decided to analyze the Catalina film.
And there seems to be some holes or some kind of transparency underneath here. One takes a good look at this, and considering that the speed of the object, as reported by Lee Hansen, the photographer, is that this is moving at about 120 miles an hour, this begins to look like a small commercial airplane. And one can draw the comparison that you have the bright wing on the top, the windows, and the stabilizer, the rudder structure, and that's it. The Catalina film, I'm afraid, falls into the category of an identified flying airplane.
Lunar orbiter missions were initiated in early 1964 and consisted of 5 identical unmanned spacecraft to investigate the surface of the moon. The main purpose of the program was to locate smooth, level areas on the moon's near side to confirm the areas as suitable for manned landing sites for the Apollo program. Other program objectives were to collect data on the moon's gravitational field to provide precision trajectory information and study radiation and micrometeoroid flux in the vicinity of the moon. The orbiter took pictures of the moon's surface. More than 90% of the pictures taken were transmitted successfully, including the historic Earth rise taken from the moon on August 23, 1966. It was hailed at that time as the greatest photograph of the 20th century. The orbiter also obtained environmental data during all periods of visibility. Some photographs were not transmitted. However, when the transmitting equipment failed during the readout operation, only a small number of pictures were lost, and other data collection was not affected. Lunar Orbiter 2 made significant additions to the techniques and data required to land on the moon. Mission 3 differed from the previous 2 missions in that it was a site confirmation mission rather than a site selection mission. Despite some operational problems during the mission, Orbiter 4 was highly successful in fulfilling its purpose. The photographs obtained provided information and detail at least 10 times better than Earth-based observations. The photography captured during Mission 5 was an incredible improvement in resolution from Mission 4. This allowed NASA to gain better insight into sites of interest on the near side of the moon. The far side photography provided coverage of essentially all areas not covered during the preceding 4 missions. In the early 2000s, a former Air Force technician specializing in photographic printer repair made a shocking statement to the public about his experience while working for the NSA during the 1960s.
I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And at that point, I became frightened.
Another now famous unidentified lunar object was spotted by the Lunar Orbiter 3 in February of 1967. A total of 149 medium resolution and 477 high resolution frames were returned from this mission. And in one composite image, an object known as the Shard can be seen. This object was supposedly located between the Bruce crater and the Sinus Midi Mare plain area of the moon. NASA has never acknowledged this phenomenon.
And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. So it was rare that someone would do something like this, but this fellow and I were the same rank. I think he was very distressed. He had the same pallor and demeanor as the scientists outside the room. They were just as concerned as he was, and he needed to discuss it with somebody. So that was the end of it right there. I didn't take it any further than that. I just filed it away. But the interesting thing, every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon, being really naive, And of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Researcher and filmmaker James Fox started his journey into UFOs through Apollo astronaut testimony.
Basically, out of this whole UFO phenomenon, when did you become interested in the idea that NASA astronauts have seen UFOs in space and that possibly had been covered up?
I never did until I wasn't actively looking for UFOs in space. NASA. I watched an interview in the early 90s with Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, sixth man to walk the moon. And he talked about UFOs very openly. And I thought, here's a man who's got everything to lose and nothing to gain by what he's doing.
It's the sort of disclosure UFO investigators are demanding from the U.S. government. How would people react?
Well, it would be kind of good. It's about time.
Former astronaut Edgar Mitchell is the sixth man to walk on the moon and a firm believer that aliens have visited our planet repeatedly. So I had to ask, why are they coming in these little glancing visits and we haven't had a more meaningful dialogue or contact or attempt to communicate with these people?
Well, I think we have.
Really?
I think we have, but it is not common knowledge.
Mitchell told me after he returned from the moon, he was briefed at the Pentagon by a high-ranking officer, whose name he would not reveal, who said the U.S. government does have evidence of alien spacecraft and is keeping it a secret.
Well, I think the reason it's still a secret is power and control, controlling whatever technology exists.
All of this is fascinating stuff, if it is true.
I mean, I've talked to government insiders and intelligence folks, and they kind of laugh at it. But obviously, they have secret craft that we don't know about. That's obvious. But whether they have successfully reverse engineered what they recovered in Roswell That's something that I have not seen the evidence for. I'm not saying definitively that it didn't happen, that they weren't successfully reverse engineered. I have seen zero evidence of it. That's just me. And people can disagree all they want, and that's fine.
The Apollo missions began in an irregular way compared to the previous manned capsule missions. This turned out disastrous for the first Apollo 1 test pilots. Apollo 2 and 3, which were unmanned, were called AS-202 and AS-203 respectively, in which the newly designed Apollo capsule was married to the Saturn 1B rocket vehicle system. July 5th, 1966. An unmanned flight of the Saturn 1B rocket. It carried no command and service module, as its purpose was to verify the design of the S-4B rocket's stage restart capability. This would later be used in the Apollo program to boost astronauts from Earth orbit on a trajectory to the moon. It achieved its goals, but the stage was inadvertently destroyed after 4 orbits. Launched unmanned on August 25, 1966, by a Saturn 1B vector and suborbital flight, this flight was used to perform tests on the command and service module, which was later recovered, destined to perform a manned landing on the moon. On January 27, 1967, at Launch Pad 34 at the Kennedy Space Center, astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee were sealed inside of their spacecraft for a plugs-out test. The spacecraft was pressurized with pure oxygen. Numerous communication problems were encountered during the test.
Now we gotta get to the moon. We can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings.
Suddenly, a spark occurred in the wiring of the spacecraft somewhere below Grissom's feet. In the pure oxygen atmosphere, the fire flashed through the spacecraft, consuming anything flammable. The crew struggled to open the hatch of the command module. It was a complex task that required too much time. Before they could open the hatch, the fumes given off from the fire asphyxiated them.
One thing to take note of about the Apollo 1 mission is that many of the astronauts were very nervous about this Apollo spacecraft and its rapid buildup, concurrently with the Gemini mission still being finished. Many of the astronauts were being swapped over to the Apollo mission, and this rapid buildup looked like it was going to cause malfunctions and errors to that spacecraft. Walter Schirra, he actually commented to Gus Grissom, one of the pilots of the early Gemini project that had been swapped over to Apollo 1, that something didn't ring right about the Apollo 1 spacecraft, and that if he saw any signs of trouble, that he should get out quickly.
After this disastrous fire during the Apollo 1 test, NASA decided to run many successive test flights that were unmanned. Mike Bara famously co-authored the book Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA, in which he speculates with photo evidence that NASA has been covering up anomalies on the moon.
The other possibility is that we have had far more advanced technology than we will acknowledge for the last 60, 70 years, and it's some of our guys having a little fun with the spam in a can dudes that are stuck in the Apollo program. That's what Gus Grissom once referred to Apollo as, you know, we're spam in a can, he was overheard to say, and they've been to the moon already, they've been to Mars already, they got technology we can't even dream of here. And they're sticking us up here in these rickety old rockets and risking our lives. And of course, he ended up losing his life. And a lot of people have a lot of suspicions about that he was such a vocal advocate for the fact that they had better technology than they were using to go to the moon. And it really made him angry and could have made him a target.
November 9th, 1967, was the day in which the Saturn V launch vehicle was first tested. This was the rocket that would send astronauts to the moon. On April 4th, 1968, this unmanned flight tested the Saturn V's ability to perform a translunar injection using 80% of the payload, which the later manned mission would perform again. Unfortunately, the phenomenon known as the pogo effect damaged the two Rocketdyne engines on the second stage when the internal fuel lines ruptured. The Rocketdyne J2 engine on the S4B third stage also failed to restart translunar injection, so the correct translunar velocity could not be achieved. Nevertheless, NASA considered the Saturn V ready to receive its first crew. October 11th, 1968. Apollo 7 was the first manned spaceflight of the Apollo program. Don Eisel, Commander Walter M. Schirra, and Walter Cunningham's crew spend almost 11 days in space testing a command module spacecraft designed to orbit the Earth and safely bring humans to the moon and back again. The mission objective was to demonstrate crew performance with the command service module.
Apollo 7 was also go for an exhaustive series of tests of its worthiness in space. One of the first things which had to be learned was whether the astronauts could control the spacecraft combined with the S4B Saturn stage. A very similar thing would have to be done during the early phases of a lunar mission. The answer was not long in coming.
S4B test complete. Beautiful.
That was outstanding.
Real fine. Outstanding.
Next, the spacecraft and S4B stage were separated. The question now was whether the astronauts could turn their spacecraft around and control it to the degree required for future physical link-ups with equipment in space. For this, too, would have to be done in the lunar flight. And again, the answer was yes.
Was a little flashes like Gemini?
Something that will not be seen in the lunar flight or in any other forthcoming Apollo mission were the panels at the top of the S4B stage. They will simply be jettisoned in the future, but they drew comment in Apollo 7.
And the slot panel at the top, left, and bottom are opened at I would guess to be about a 45-degree angle, and the slot panel on the right is just opened maybe 30 degrees at the very best.
Roger. Looks like you're looking at a four-jawed angry alligator.
During this mission, multiple tests for the Saturn rocket system and the astronaut crew interactions were successful. This was the first mission to use the Apollo flight suit and to successfully complete a live video transmission from space.
Always before, we've had to be content with merely listening to our astronauts during their flights. In Apollo 7, through the medium of television, we could actually see them in space for the first time and become better acquainted with weightless life aboard a spacecraft.
You're picking up, I can read it now, just a minute. It says from that...
December 21st, 1968. Apollo 8 was the second crewed mission of the Apollo program and the first mission to bring humans to the moon's orbit. They were the first humans to leave low Earth orbit, the first to see the entire Earth, the first to see the dark side of the moon, and the first to see the sunrise of the Earth from the moon.
T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. So we have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Apollo 8 took 3 days to reach the moon. It orbited 10 times over 20 hours.
This transmission is coming to you approximately halfway between the moon and the Earth. We've been 31 hours, about 20 minutes into flight. We have about less than 40 hours left to go to the moon.
So Apollo 8 glided on silently, farther from Earth than man had ever before been. A microscopic dot of life in the cosmic void.
Face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light."
The crew also made a televised Christmas Eve broadcast in which they read the first 10 verses of the book of Genesis. This broadcast was the most watched in history at the time.
And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst."
The choice to spend Christmas Eve in lunar orbit was made because that was the time of optimal lighting conditions for surveying the Apollo landing site 1. During the mission, astronauts took photos of the Earth from the moon, including the second Earthrise picture, which was higher quality than the Earthrise taken previously by the lunar orbiter.
Apollo 8, Houston, what does the old moon look like from 60 miles, over?
Okay, Houston. The moon is essentially gray. No color. Looks like plaster of Paris. Or sort of a grayish beach sand. We can see quite a bit of detail. The craters are all rounded off. There's quite a few of them. Some of them are newer. Many of them look like, especially the round ones, look like hit by meteorites or projectiles of some sort.
Okay, 11, we have a picture. We see the Earth right in the center of the screen, over.
During these TV transmissions, the astronauts also provided a verbal commentary to accompany the footage being broadcast. Contrary to popular belief, these broadcasts were not extemporaneous or improvised performances. Rather, both the footage and dialogue were entirely scripted out prior to the flight. The Apollo cover story was specifically designed to allow those missions to be conducted in the public eye, while at the same time actively concealing the fact that evidence of intelligent extraterrestrial life might have been discovered in space and on the moon. The scripting protocols followed during the Apollo program were for the most part highly effective at ensuring the astronauts did not divulge any sensitive information while they communicated over the public radio channel with Houston. However, when the astronauts were not in radio contact with mission control, they did on occasion make some unscripted and rather candid comments to each other about what they were observing outside their spacecraft. These comments were captured by a device mounted inside the Apollo Command and Service module that was known as the Data Storage Equipment Recorder, or DSE. The Apollo DSE was essentially a black box cockpit voice and telemetry recording system. In addition to recording a variety of spacecraft parameters, the DSE's 14-track tape also recorded many internal crew conversations that took place when the astronauts were not communicating with mission control. Although it is presumed that the recordings were destroyed or lost, the transcriptions were made at NASA by the woman shown in this image and others. And although they were originally classified, those transcripts can be found today in the NASA archives. Many of the comments captured by the DSE were made when the spacecraft was behind the far side of the moon, with the astronauts describing various sights not visible from Earth.
What's very interesting about the Apollo 8 manned mission to the moon is that we would hear about all of these things that astronauts and UFO researchers would repeat being demonstrated in the communications, photos, and footage throughout many other Apollo manned missions. That is, structures on the far side of the moon, UFOs and anomalous activity in space, as well as this eerie music or strange sounds that the astronauts only heard when they were on the far side of the moon. And what's interesting is that we will hear a more detailed account and more evidence of this strange music or sounds on the far side of the moon in the later Apollo 10 manned mission. And one has to wonder, is this sound emanating from a base or maybe these structures that were observed on the far side of the lunar surface? Or was the sound actually coming from space? And does the moon operate as some kind of insulator to feedback coming from space?
March 3rd, 1969. Apollo 9 was the third manned space mission in the Apollo program, and the first flight with the Apollo lunar module. The crew spent 10 days in low Earth orbit, testing several critical aspects of landing on the moon, including lunar module engines, spacesuit life support systems, navigation systems, and docking maneuvers.
We were that first crew that was going to get a chance to fly this vehicle and test this vehicle that was going to take human beings to the moon. We were very, very aware of the time pressure, and everything has to go right if we're for sure going to meet Kennedy's goal of getting to the moon in that decade and back. We tested every possible thing that could be tested. The mission was completely dedicated to testing the systems, the engines, and the guidance and navigation, all kinds of things that we could do in Earth orbit.
Really very difficult to get the coordinate system in your head. Normally we dock looking out this way, and for the docking with the lunar module, you had to look out this way. So the control system didn't operate the way it normally would.
How does that sports car handle, Jim?
Pretty nice.
This was the first manned flight of a lunar module, the first docking and extraction with the lunar module, the first completion of a two-man spacewalk, and the second docking of a two-manned spacecraft.
We depressurized both the lunar module and the command module, and Rusty was going to get out and transfer over to the command module. And we were doing that to see that it could be done.
Two telecasts were made to Earth from Apollo 9. The first, on March 5th, lasted for almost 7 minutes. The second telecast on the following day lasted for about 13 minutes and only showed interior views of the lunar module. Photographs taken as part of the multi-spectral terrain photographic experiment were successful.
Now, Dave wanted to get out of the spacecraft too, so part of the mission was for him to open up the hatch. So we were all out there in a vacuum.
Here we are at this historic moment that we're all part of, not just the astronauts, but everybody who's alive today, and we're all on this small planet as representative of life. We're beginning to move out from this planet, which, as far as we know, contains all of the life in our little corner of the universe.
Manual attitude control is good.
Roger, copy.
Good. I'm going to pull your flag. Oops, I bent that one.
BTU expenditure for each crewman averaging 1,300 surgeon reports.
And, Jack, this is Houston. Looks like your water temperature's getting pretty high. You might want to go to intermediate cooling or slow down or something. Looks like you're getting a little warm.
May 18th, 1969. The Apollo 10 mission was the fourth manned mission of the Apollo program.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
This mission was a successful synthesis of the previous two completed missions. It resulted in the lunar module being placed for the first time in lunar orbit.
And they give a silver Snoopy for excellence awards. I wanted to honor the people that had worked so hard, so we call it Snoopy. Well, you needed two names, so naturally the other one was Charlie Brown.
Stafford and Cernan were placed in the lunar module Snoopy, after leaving the command service module. They managed to place themselves in an elliptical lunar orbit, about 14 kilometers above the lunar surface.
You're amazed at what you see. The one thing that always amazed me were the size of the boulders. There were these gigantic craters, and down at the bottom would be boulders, and up on the rim would be boulders.
During the second and final return to the moon, the lunar module lost control, which was regained shortly thereafter by its pilot, Thomas Stafford.
Yeah, okay, something went wild there on that station. And we're all set. We didn't lock it. We're going ahead to the autumn.
Charlie Brown, Houston, they got staging. They had a wild gyration, though, but they got it under control.
One thing people always ask, were you frightened? Were you scared? The answer is no. There were fighter pilots, test pilots, so we knew what risks were. You did everything you could to mitigate the risk, but there was a risk. And so we understood that.
After completing this maneuver, the lunar module was abandoned and launched into orbit around the sun. As a final result, the mission was a success. Separation and docking tests in lunar orbit between the command module and the lunar module were all successful. The lunar module descended to an altitude of approximately 15 kilometers above the lunar surface.
Well, we had a series of debriefings with them because we had all the procedures worked out. In fact, I remember I went to Neil, I says, buddy, here you are. Here's all the techniques, all the procedures down to the last 50,000 feet. And you take it there, hard descent on the surface, 50,000 feet up, it's all done. So they just followed all the procedures we had. We're using the Hasselblad cameras to give the highest resolution available then, and the radar was going. So radar mapped, photo mapped, and visually mapped.
But I'll tell you one thing, when we went over, we made 2 passes over the landing site, and I tell you what, I think I said things that, boy, we are down among them. I felt like I had to pick up my feet to keep from dragging on top of the mountains. I mean, we were close, and we're going over those hills at 3,000 miles an hour. So you can just imagine what that was like, and it was one of those quick touch and goes. We didn't have a chance to put our tail hook down to stay, but and that would have been the big part of the challenge. Nonetheless, we were only the second flight to go to the moon, the first to take the lunar module, and it was the right decision to be made to get everything done. And we found some problems that had we attempted to land might have kept us from landing and then paved the way for Apollo 11 to go ahead and successfully land. So it was the right decision at the right time.
I've looked at a lot of transcripts. The Apollo Lunar Surface Journal was great for that. On Apollo 10, which is where we have the images of Sinus Medii, it's really fascinating because Gene Cernan was on that mission as well as Apollo 17. And they're at 50,000 feet. And he says, wow, we are really down among them now. Like, there's nothing at 50,000 feet. If the moon is what they tell us is, unless it's this artificial glass structure at 50,000 feet.
That they're scared to hit it.
Yeah. Meaning he's in amongst towering stuff. Well, it is in the mountains, because the mountains aren't that high for sure.
In addition to recording telemetry related to the performance of the lunar module spacecraft itself, the DSEA also made audio recordings of any crew conversation throughout the mission.
Houston, 2 minutes to LOS. Everybody here says Godspeed.
Okay, and we'll see you right on the other side in orbit.
Roger, 7620. Okay, this has got to be the greatest sight ever.
You ought to see it up here.
Noises reportedly were heard in May 1969 by the Apollo 10 astronauts as they circled the moon. The sounds, which lasted about an hour, were recorded and transmitted to Mission Control in Houston.
That is music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that? That whistling sound?
We are getting data. We don't have any voice communication yet.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
Roger, 10, it's good to hear from you.
I wouldn't believe this thing.
Roger, 10, we're still having problems lighting up. We'd like you to go to wide beam for 30 seconds and then back to narrow. Over.
I can see it with the naked eye, and then I put the binocular on it, and I can see it spinning around, and I wouldn't bet my life on it being the S4B, but it sure's got to be something like it.
That was Gene Cernan reporting that sighting.
You know, it's a beautiful sight. We're sitting here, and it's almost like science fiction looking back at it, Bruce. This is the Peacock of Apollo 10.
Roger.
And we'd like to say hello from the 5 of us, if we may.
Roger.
Charlie, this is it's so hard to describe. You can go right up. It's incredible.
Okay, this has got to be the greatest sight ever.
You ought to see it up here. The land masses don't seem to stand out quite as clearly today as they did yesterday.
How's the view, 10?
We have our astute geologists here overlooking the surface, and they'll report a minute.
Roger, standing by. Over.
Okay, we're just passing from the highlands over into the Murray area, and you can pass on to Jack. We caught a couple of real pretty little volcanoes, there's no doubt about them, and we got a couple of good high-resolution photos. And it still looks kind of brownish gray to us here. Over.
Roger, we copy.
Yeah, there was a place back there where there was one volcano, or whatever it was, that it was all white on the outside, but definitely black around the top of it.
Roger.
Charlie, it might sound corny, but the view is really out of this world.
Roger. We had a couple of comments the back row that I won't repeat. Apollo 10, Houston, 2 minutes to LOS. Everybody here says Godspeed.
Okay, and we'll see you right on the other side in orbit.
Roger, 762255.
Many skeptics and debunkers will remark on the fact that mainstream media was not reporting on UFOs, anomalies, and structures being witnessed by astronauts during the Apollo manned missions. And the simple reason why mainstream media wasn't exposed to this back in the 1960s and 70s during the Apollo missions is because that information was deeply classified. In fact, the DSEA tapes weren't actually declassified till 12 years after these Apollo manned missions. And additionally, we didn't have photography and film fully examined by many of the UFO researchers and independent researchers like Luna Cognita until many years after.
How can they keep the secret? Some of these SETI people like really just make me laugh. I've heard some pretty stupid comments coming out of these mouths. Like this assumption that, oh yeah, the press, the media wants this scoop. Well, the media doesn't want that scoop because they're not authorized to give it, and they won't give it because the intelligence community will tell them what they can give. And NASA doesn't want this scoop. And I don't care what these SETI people like to tell the public. They don't want that scoop.
So another case like this, which is really interesting, is the case of NASA frame AS10 324822. This is a photograph or a series of photographs that was taken over the lunar surface, right in the middle, Sinus Meta E, the sea in the middle, where the Apollo 10 spacecraft was flying by and took photographs of this area. This is dead center on the lunar disk. If you were to look at the lunar disk, you'd see a triangular-shaped crater called Eucurt, and then right next to it is the Sinus Meta E area. It's also an area where Surveyor 4 disappeared in midair while descending to a landing there, just like a bug went splat on a windshield. So this is the photograph. This is an original analog image. It's been scanned in by researchers back in the 1990s. And it looks pretty straightforward. This is actually AS10 324810. So it's a couple images earlier. It's 12 images earlier than that, over the Sinus Meta E region. And you notice in the background that there's all this weird sort of stuff. You see all this light sources, all these, that can't be stars because the frame exposure is 1/250th of a second. If you go much longer than that, the whole foreground is going to be washed out with light. So it has to be really, really rapid, so it can't possibly be far distant stars and galaxies and planets. But if you enhance this image, if you brighten up the background, it gets even weirder because this is what the background is. So what you see is that these light points are actually just points of structure that is in this massive, miles-high geometric structure above the lunar surface, over the sea in the middle, Sinus Meta E. Now, if you notice, there are these crisscrossing lines, and people are like, oh, those are just scratches on the negative. Well, but that doesn't make any sense because when do scratches on the negative follow the curvature of the lunar surface? And when do they intersect at 90-degree angles like these do? And again, as an engineer, I look at this, I look at the spacing. I say, this is exactly how I would construct a grid-like structure over the surface of the moon. If you zoom in on it, there's this sort of box-like shape. And here's spars coming this way and spars coming that way, and here's one crossing. And these are all not scratches. These all have structure to them. They all have, if you look at them really, really closely, they all have segments. They all have aspects to them that make them appear to be engineering. And when you enhance it, put a color into it, it looks even weirder. Here's another version with a slightly darker background. So then you get a couple of pictures later, and you go to AS10 324816, so 4 photographs later, over the surface of Sinus Meta E, and you have the same phenomenon. You have these little points of light which should not be there at all. And then when you enhance that background, you see this. This looks like, I don't know, skyscrapers on the moon, the Twin Towers. I mean, when you look and zoom up on this, and also notice, this isn't some sort of like digital artifact, because if it was, it would be over the whole thing, yet there's this big hole through which you can see stuff in the background, more big towering stuff. And when you zoom up on the edges of that, you can see just how weird they are. They look like big glass skyscrapers. So having found this stuff, Hoagland was really interested in finding more. So he went and he got himself an old North American photographic catalog from the time period. And as he looked at these images, he went and he said, oh, well, look at some of these other ones. These other catalog images don't look like much at all. They look really underexposed, including this one, which is completely blacked out. It's like they left the lens cap on the camera or something. So what did he do? He ordered the blacked out photograph. And when he got AS-10 324822, again taken just what, 6 frames later, he got this area of Sinus Meta E, which is about the size of the Los Angeles basin and has been analyzed by geologists who said this is a completely non-natural pattern. Again, 90 degrees, crisscrossing streets, that kind of thing, as if you were looking at Los Angeles. And as you zoom up on it, it gets even weirder. And then there are objects that appeared that then seem to disappear. What they did is they ordered 4822, once they thought they had something. They ordered 4822 from 9 different NASA archives that existed at the time where you could get photographic prints. Hawaii, Maryland, Washington, D.C. And what they found is that all 9 of the versions of AS-10 324822 were different. So what they realized was that what they were looking at was probably a power winder sequence. The spacecraft is moving left to right. The astronaut's looking out the window. He's got a power winder on his Hasselblad. He pushes down his finger and takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so objects would appear in some versions of 4822 and disappear in others. Here's an example of one of those. It looks like a giant paperclip near Los Angeles. If you go back to Los Angeles, that object should be right here. It's not there. But then the next frame, it is there because the light changes. So this is a huge antenna. This tower is a couple hundred feet tall. And whatever this thing is, it's an antenna or something, it does not belong on the moon if the moon is what NASA tells us it is. And there are other frames through the area of 4822 that show weird light reflections, like there's lights on down there. And then there's this object, which is my favorite one on the various versions of 4822. It's pretty famous. It's called the Castle. And it appears to be hanging amidst all this stuff, just hanging there in space, miles above the lunar surface. It has segments that clearly look to me to be structural. There's even an indication of a sagging line, yeah, scaffolding or a sagging line that it's hanging from. You can see that the weight of this thing is pulling on this wire that it's hanging from. And it does appear in a couple different versions of the frame. Here's the one with the wire, and then this one is obviously the next one over, another step over, where the thing has not reflected the light because now the spacecraft has moved, so it's changed direction just a little bit. The wire disappears that it's hanging from, and it's narrower. See how it's narrower than it is here. But
it's underexposed.
Right, and basically because the light geometry is fading. The light is not now bouncing directly into the camera like it was a split second before that, because the spacecraft is moving at thousands of miles an hour. And again, you go up to the edge of it and you can see that there's sort of an internal geometry to it. There's a lot of cells and structures. It is absolutely fascinating. And they knew what was on these because they hid all 9 of these photographs under one frame number. It should be 4822, 4823, 4824, all the way up to 4832, but it's not. It's all buried under one frame number, which I will remind you, blacked out in the catalog because they didn't want anybody to look at it. But because of the religious aspects of this, the weird, strange symbolism and stuff, they couldn't just completely erase them from history. They had to give you some access to the originals. If it wasn't for Hoagland being super clever, we would never have found this stuff.
For the first time, man is about to set foot on the moon's surface. This is the television camera that will record that historic event. You will see it live on your home television set. I'm Stan LaBar, Westinghouse Program Manager for Apollo television cameras. The public is probably most familiar with this color television camera that was used by astronaut Tom Stafford on Apollo 10. And this is the camera that took those extraordinary color pictures of both the Earth and the Moon. Incidentally, this color camera will be used in the command module on Apollo 11. But the world attention will be focused on this small black and white camera that will be located in the lens, and it will record the astronaut as he descends to the lunar surface and takes those first monumental steps.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11, the flight to land of the first men on the moon. The vehicle starting to pressurize as far as the propellant tanks are concerned, and all is still go as we monitor our status for it. Firing command coming in now. We're on an automatic sequence as the master computer supervises hundreds of events occurring over these last few minutes. Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight. Good luck and Godspeed. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
July 16th, 1969. Apollo 11 was the 5th manned mission of the U.S. Apollo program and the first in history to land a human being on the moon.
Today I wanted to give you a closer look at a very brief segment of 16mm DAC motion picture footage from the NASA archives that was originally shot back in July of 1969 during the flight of Apollo 11. And the footage was taken through one of the windows of the command service module during what was called the Translunar Coast, or TLC phase of the mission. And this was the 3-day period when the astronauts were crossing the almost 400,000 kilometer cislunar void that separates our Earth from the moon. And at some point during this outbound journey through cislunar space, one of the Apollo 11 astronauts did some unscheduled shooting with the 16mm DAC motion picture camera, and in the process managed to film several unidentified objects outside their spacecraft. And to show you what I mean, let's first just have a look at the raw segment of footage exactly as it's archived and shown by NASA in their Apollo archives. While this particular clip has been digitally archived by NASA so that when played back it appears to be about 1 second in duration, it is not actually showing us a 1 second period of time caught on film. This clip we're examining here is actually time-compressed stop-motion footage. And in this case, the sequence is comprised of 11 individual distinct frames of 16mm film that were originally exposed at 1 frame per second intervals over a period of 11 seconds. And this type of stop-motion filming was possible because the Mauer 16mm DAC that was used throughout the Apollo program was in fact a variable frame rate motion picture camera that was capable of shooting at 4 different preset exposure speeds, either 1, 6, 12, or 24 frames per second. And in the case of this footage, rather than archiving it at the correct 1 frame per second playback speed, they instead incorrectly archived the sequence as if it had been shot at 12 frames per second instead. So this means that NASA actually present this stop motion sequence in such a way that it is being shown at a playback rate that's 12 times faster than what the frames were actually exposed at. Whatever these objects are, they are clearly flying free in space, and we can say with certainty that they are definitely not any declared satellites or known debris. We don't know what they are, where they came from, how they got there, where they're going, or what they're doing there. And that, by definition, puts them into the category of being unidentified.
So if somebody's going to say UFOs are just our craft from a very top secret aerospace project, and for example, some people will say the Phoenix Lights, that might have been what's called a TR-3B. It's supposed to be this massive black budget craft that was a crew and heavy equipment carrier that would take stuff to space in sort of what people label a secret space program. What do you think about that? Like,
I don't believe it.
You don't believe it?
Nope. Don't believe it.
Would you say that
I think that the Phoenix Lights, I mean, that was like 2 miles across from the eyewitness testimony, including the governor of Arizona. And it could hover very, very slowly. And when it took off like at the speed of light. I mean, it would change its shape a little bit and just gone. And then you have the telepathic aspect of it too, from the witnesses that I spoke to. So I'm not gonna sit there and say that I definitively can make a statement that there's no such thing as a secret space program. I just haven't seen the evidence for it. And I haven't heard the testimony for it. And I'm highly dubious, even though here I am putting out a film on a UFO crash with live aliens in the town. But I just haven't seen the evidence. I mean, it makes sense that there are sightings here. Why wouldn't there be sightings out there? You know, it's not my area of expertise. I don't dig into, I look into the phenomenon, and if it leads me to an astronaut, great, and if not, you know. So I just know that what Faye Ann Potter told me about her brother Buzz Aldrin, that they saw something on the way to the moon.
The lunar landing was on July 20th of that same year, and the following day, 2 astronauts became the first to walk on the lunar surface.
Okay, engine stop. ATA at a descent. Mode control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
When we did get close and we rolled out and saw it for the first time, it was a revelation. It was gigantic. It filled our entire window.
Flying through the moon shadow and seeing the sun eclipsed by the moon as we approached it, that was a very spectacular sight.
Commander Armstrong was the first human to set foot on the surface of the Earth's satellite on July 21st, 1969. At 2:56 UTC International Time, south of the Sea of Tranquility, 6.5 hours after landing on the moon. This historic milestone was broadcast to the entire planet from the Parkes Observatory in Australia.
Here, men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind.
there's this thing that came out about 2014, and it's an image that was found on the internet that had actually been posted back in the early days, like 2002. And it had a number, AS1120 pyramid 20 small 2.jpg. That was the name of the image. And it showed what clearly appears to be an artificial structure on the surface of the moon, but nobody really knew where it came from. The AS11 indicated that it was an Apollo 11 shot. And it took researchers quite a while to actually find the image, and it turned out the image was AS11 38 55 64. Now this is interesting because it was an image that was taken, it was a photograph that was taken by one of the Apollo 11 astronauts, either Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, or Michael Collins, shooting out the window of the command module as they were flying over the lunar surface on trans-Earth injection. They had already fired the engine, they were heading towards Earth, and they were just shooting the hell out of the backside of the moon. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they took these pictures just, again, probably with a power winder, one after the other, but the film was so good that they could take just lots and lots of photographs. This is the image as it appeared in a NASA archive. And it's an image of a crater called Daedalus. Now, this thing is very, very near the crater Daedalus. It's actually Daedalus R, I believe. And Daedalus is dead center on the back disk of the moon. In other words, it's the exact antipode, the other side of Sinus Medii, where we just saw the castle. So you might expect to find something there. I have a feeling this is why they were photographing this. So, in that area, and again, this is Sinus Medii with the triangular crater, pretty interesting stuff. And then on the back, you have this ziggurat. So as we looked at this thing, it began to look more and more like something that was completely artificial and did not belong there. And again, I went through it, did some enhancement, tried to get more detail out. And what you see, or at least what I saw, is this wall structure, sort of a weird angled front end to it. There's a triangle shape there. And then there's like a central box with maybe windows. There's a passageway to actually enter it and like a little dome on top. Pretty bizarre stuff. Well, somebody pointed out this looks a lot like the ziggurat at Ur in Mesopotamia or modern day Iraq. And yeah, here's this basic structure. Here's these entrances, these walkways. This is what it looked like when they first found it in the 1930s, and it's now been re-excavated. And this is what the original structure looked like. You have exterior walls, you have an interior square structure, you have a single entranceway, which is how they were set up for defense. And then you have these ramps leading up to it. Now, if you were to take these ramps and like fill them in, again, here's a little dome. So a little dome right here on top of the structure. So it looks basically like this, like there's an exterior structure and an interior structure like a ziggurat. And again, I'm gonna remind you, okay, here's a dome, here's a little dome, here's an interior square structure, here's the interior square structure, here's the exterior walls, there they are. And then if you took this area and filled it in, it would look, with dirt, it would look probably just like this thing does. The problem is when you go to AS11 38 55 64, it doesn't really look quite the same. So we finally found the object near the crater Daedalus R. This is the area involved. This is the original image that was found by a guy named KK Samurai, by the way. That was what he called himself. He's the one who found it. He was given this image by a very interesting character. So here is the Daedalus ziggurat on today's image. It's gone, right? Where is it? Well, it's actually supposed to be right here in the middle, but there's the front ramps, but it's all gone. It's just blank. It's nothing but a crater. And again, I did the best I could with it, with what they have on NASA's surface now. It doesn't look like really anything. They've blurred it out. They've added shadows. And again, I'm going to tell you again, I went and analyzed the interior of this crater and this area here. And again, it's one color, pitch black, over the entire thing. That means they drew on this. They drew on this. If they drew on this, they drew on other parts of it too. So again, from a distance, as you step back, it kind of looks like the same thing, but it actually really doesn't. And they're trying to convince you this is nothing but an optical illusion. Now, I got into a very strong conflict with a couple of NASA guys over this. They're like, oh, it's obviously nothing, you know, you can't, yeah, you're crazy, you don't know what you're looking at. But clearly what's happened here is that the original image from which KK Samurai drew his conclusions and his version is completely different than 5564. The problem is we didn't know at the time originally where he got this interesting version. Where did he get it from? And what was on it? But here's the thing. This is supposed to be the ziggurat right here. But as I looked at this image, I found that there was, even though they had erased the ziggurat, there was a lot of other interesting stuff on here they didn't erase. A lot of interesting stuff. These are some of the areas that are marked as we go through them real quickly. There's this particular guy, which is just a sort of a normal crater. But then what is this thing up above here? What is this one up here? Number 5, up in the corner of the image. And as we zoom up on that, I see stuff that with my trained eye looks really, really weird. This is the area where they have blacked out the sky behind this. Well, what is this thing? Well, if you look at it, it's pretty bizarre because what you've got here is this is a hangar cut into the side of this mountain. It's filled in with debris in the front, and that would be the other side. You're looking at it at an angle, and then this is some sort of disc shape with something else going on. Like, what the hell are these things? See? Stone spire, stone spire, stone spire. What are they? But it's right there, and they're all in the same area, because if you have one anomaly, no matter how clear it is, if there's nothing else around it, you can't really say it's something. It could just be, again, a really bizarre looking artifact. So let's go back and look. There's like a tube that you can follow that runs for miles and miles along the surface and then seems to attach itself like a drill underneath this overhanging ridge. This thing is hanging there. There's all kinds of structure. It's just bizarre.
People who come here to this museum and look at our spacecraft Columbia are most often struck by its small size, which from their perspective is understandable. From our point of view, the command module was a wonderful improvement over our previous spacecraft, which were really cramped. And so we enjoyed the luxury of a big volume machine.
Yeah, I thought we had amazingly good accommodations. We had hot and cold water. The food was even edible. All in all, it was a nicely packaged small enclosure, and we could comfortably have stayed there far in excess of 8 days.
On July 24th, the 3 astronauts achieved a perfect splashdown in the waters of the Pacific Ocean, ending the mission.
Well, it proved that the United States could accomplish tremendous goals if they worked together as a team.
After the flight of Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and I had an around-the-world tour, and every place we went, I thought they'd, in some places, have the attitude of, oh, well, you Americans finally did this. Not at all. The attitude, every country, regardless of their internal politics, they all said, we did it, we humans.
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July that was certainly the highlight for the three of us of that decade. We're going to divert a little bit from the format of past press conferences and talk about the things that interested us most, in particular the things that occurred on and about the moon.
Apollo 11 astronaut Edwin Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, has actually given an interview where he confirmed that certain segments of his Apollo mission were indeed carefully scripted to control exactly what the public saw and heard. Back in 2003, Aldrin was interviewed for Neil Armstrong's only authorized biography, and during that interview, he was asked about whether some of the live television transmissions that were made from the CSM during the flight really were improvised and unscripted. And in response, Aldrin first admits that NASA, quote, went to great lengths, unquote, to make sure that they appeared unscripted. And he then goes on to say the following, and I'll quote Aldrin directly here. The fact is, they were carefully planned in advance. And for me, the exact words were written down on little cards stuck onto the panel in front of us.
We will use a number of films and slides which most of you have already seen, and with the intent of pointing out some of the things that we observed on the spot, which may not be obvious to those of you who are looking at them here from the surface of Earth.
This motion picture DAC footage was recorded during the Apollo 11 ascent back into orbit and famously presents an orb-like object flying along the lunar horizon.
What's very interesting about the Apollo 11 manned mission is that this mission also would be very rife with rumors of anomalous or UFO activity out there on the moon. In fact, one of the rumors that's quite prevalent is that a craft was waiting, a non-terrestrial craft was waiting on the lunar surface for the Apollo 11 astronauts when they did their first moonwalks. Another rumor that actually came from Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo 11 astronaut himself, was that a UFO was following the Apollo spacecraft on the way to the moon in the middle of cislunar space. And the astronauts had tracked it while they were floating through space.
Do you have any idea where the informant is with respect to us? Stand by.
Buzz Aldrin could have been one of these important figures that actually proved there is UFO activity happening in outer space. But unfortunately, he became very contradictory on his initial story in the mainstream media.
There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be? Mike decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that it had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much. Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is. You know, can you tell us what it is?" We weren't about to do that. because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously ask Houston how far away was the S4B? And a few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep and not to talk about it anymore until we came back in debriefing.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
And that's all I could think about. But in any case, I was on set, and I was just a gopher, and I turned out I got a little role, but Mickey Rooney was like, "Oh, what are you doing when you're not, here helping us out?" And I said, "I'm making a UFO film." He goes, "Oh, I'm friends with Buzz Aldrin, and you should talk to him sometime. He's got some pretty interesting, stories." And so that was my initial in with Buzz Aldrin. And then I would say probably 3 years later, I met Faye Ann Potter, Buzz Aldrin's sister. So I'm talking to Faye Ann Potter, and I said, "I heard I found out her brother was Buzz Aldrin, and I'm like, I worked on this movie set, and I found out, through Mickey Rooney, that your brother had, a sighting, but I didn't get any specifics." She said, "Oh yeah, he had 2 encounters with UFOs. And one was when he was piloting," this is what she told me. This is what Buzz Aldrin's sister told me, okay? She said that he had, and I don't know what year it was, but I think it was before he went to the moon. He was flying a fighter jet, and he chased a disc. And she said that he was so moved by the experience that he called her, and he was still shaking from it. He said he chased it till he couldn't go any higher, and he didn't catch it. That's what she told me. Then she said he also told her that they saw something or something followed them to the moon. But it was like not just a quick sighting. I think it went on for like a day or two. That's what she told me. So between Faye Ann Potter and Mickey Rooney and his wife, Jan Rooney, they said, we think we can get you an interview with Buzz Aldrin. So they got my foot in the door. They contacted him. He's a good kid. He's doing this documentary. And Buzz Aldrin agrees to meet with me.
He's in Europe.
That's the problem. He was in France on tour for some book that he was doing. Yes, I'll meet with James, but I'm on this book tour, and I'm going to be in Monte Carlo on these dates. If he wants to meet me in Monte Carlo, I'll meet with him and do an interview. So, of course, I'm going to do that. And I've got Buzz Aldrin. I think I borrowed money from somebody. I can't remember who. And we get to his hotel, and the concierge comes and says, "Mr. Fox?" So, "Yes, you have a telephone call?" And I, okay. And he gives me the phone, and it's Buzz Aldrin. I can't do the interview. I said, it's like, what do you mean you can't do the interview? I traveled all this way. You said, I can't do it. He said, it was Paul Allen.
Paul Allen.
It was Paul Allen. He said, Paul Allen just invested in SETI, and he was labeled a UFO quack, something like that.
And he didn't want to be labeled.
And he said, I'm trying to get money from Congress to develop a rocket that'll put citizens in space, and I will not jeopardize that initiative. And how's my coming forward going to change anything anyway? And I responded how I felt. And I said, well, with all due respect, sir, it takes people of your stature to elevate this whole, phenomenon out of the rut that it's in. And your contribution, your testimony would be of the utmost significance, He said, well, I'm not doing it. And he was almost kind of angry or something, like well, I did something wrong, you know? And, but he said, how's my story gonna change anything? He didn't deny it at all. And he was gonna go on camera and tell me about it.
12 men have ever walked on the moon, and the man who did it the second time anyone walked on the moon was Buzz Aldrin. He was part of the first mission that got there. The NASA astronaut on Apollo 11. He's here with a model of Apollo 11. He was with the first pair with Neil Armstrong, of course. And Buzz, the panel remains so that they might want to pop something at him. But Buzz, what's your connection with this program? What did you see?
What did I see? Well, we, the first day out, maybe 6 hours after launch, we were scheduled to make a mid-course correction. I'd like to show you a few things in this rocket just to point out the condition that we were in. We separate the command and service module, and it turns around like this, and it docks with the lunar module. Now, notice these 3 and 4 panels. Whenever the command module separates and turns around, those panels go off in 4 different directions. And we can look out these windows and see the Earth drift by and see the moon drift by.
What did you see?
And I saw a light out there, okay? This is after we had witnessed the upper stage rocket next to us make an evasive maneuver to miss the moon. And we thought, wonder what that is. You know, there are a lot of lights out there when you're not looking in the direction of the sun. There are a lot of stars, and they're all fixed relative to each other. Now, one of them starts moving, or it's moving, and we know that that's another object. It's not a star. We started thinking a little bit more about these 4 panels, and I'd seen a graph where it showed the separation distance that was calculated before liftoff, before the whole mission went, of where these panels would be in case the spacecraft made some maneuver, and they guaranteed there'd be no contact.
Hold it right there. You got me helped.
Fast forward many years.
Oh my God. So I had no idea. I had broken a story with Fife Simonton, who was the former governor of Arizona, okay? And
the Phoenix Lights.
The Phoenix Lights case, that he had not only, that he'd seen it, he did actually investigate it, and that he felt it was otherworldly. It was a big story. And I was all over the news, and we got invited on CNN. I think it was the 60th anniversary of Roswell, but I'm not positive.
Larry King Live.
Yeah, Larry King Live. And I see Buzz Aldrin in the green room. And I walked out of the green room, and I turned over to Fife Simonton, the former governor of Arizona, and I said, man, I can't wait to go, you know, this is the first time I've seen him since he canceled this interview with me 10 years earlier or whatever it was. And really no explanation given. I borrowed all this money, and, you know, I know he's had these things. They're going to get him out here just debunking everything. And Fife says, you know, James, that guy's an iconic figure in the United States history. I mean, he landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong. You really can't be doing that to him on a, you know, national live TV show.
He might punch you.
But he's a very famous, respected, he's a hero.
He's a hero.
And so I toned it down, and then I just watched him basically lie on live television.
What did I see during the flight?
Yeah,
we saw one of the 4 panels to 99.999.
Okay, I was told by a very close source of yours that you actually saw something other than that.
A lot of people have said things that I saw. That doesn't mean that I don't want to reveal the source of national television.
Someone very close.
In your years of flying, have you seen strange things?
I was flying a T-33, I guess, and I looked out and saw a star out there. But it wasn't a star, it was Venus. But it kept following me all along. And you would swear that it's another object out there, and you can turn and... I want to congratulate you on your magic show last night with all the illusions, because now we're getting a lot more illusions tonight. And can you explain everything that happened with Chris Angel last night? No, you can't.
Can't explain it, doesn't make it.
That's right.
Here's what I'm going to do, folks. I'm going to take a break, come back, and get the thought.
And one of my biggest regrets was I didn't get Faye Ann Potter on camera. I never thought she would just die so quickly. I didn't even know she was sick, you know? But Faye Ann Potter told me that he had a very dramatic encounter with a flying saucer while he chased a disc, is what she said, while piloting a fighter jet, and that they were followed by something that they were not able to explain to the moon. She did not say he had a sighting on the moon. She didn't tell me that. She said, on the way to the moon. Right. Now, what happened on the moon, I have no idea. But that's what she told me.
Apollo 11 was purely symbolic. It was land on the moon in the middle of nowhere. Avoid all this stuff that we're concerned about, because there's a whole theory that we can land on the moon, and it was out in the middle of nowhere, and it was where the stars were aligned properly in the Sea of Tranquility for Buzz Aldrin to perform his ceremony, which consecrated the moon itself as a Masonic temple, and Apollo 11 Tranquility Base is a Masonic temple. That was the purpose. All the other missions were salvage missions. Let's go land where we think interesting stuff is. Ancient alien technology, call it Anunnaki technology if you want to, left behind, and bring it back and do a Terminator 2 reverse engineering type thing. And I mean, it's pretty clear as you look at the photographic record. Oh, did they see that? Yeah, I'm sure they saw that. Did they see this? Yeah, I'm sure they saw that. I'm sure they realized that's not a rock, because they were very well trained in all this stuff.
Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today, the crazy thing about the topic of UFOs is how, when you get into it, how really non-crazy a lot of the people who know a lot about the topic turn out to be. They're kind of the opposite of what you imagine. They're not for conspiracy nuts. A lot of them are just scientists. Gary Nolan is definitely at the top of that list. He's a Stanford professor, Stanford PhD, he's an immunologist. And he has, over the last decade or two, spent a lot of time studying the harmful effects that apparent encounters with UFOs have on the human brain.
So my main job, my day job at Stanford for the last 30 years has been the development of technologies to look at cancer. It was circa 2011 or so when some people from the CIA and an aerospace company came to me to ask me for their help on the analysis of some individuals who had encountered some anomalous objects, they said. And I mean, they came to my office unannounced and then started laying out pictures and data on the table in front of me. It's a huge operation in the government to deal with those. In fact, the Senate Intelligence Committee just came out with a report this morning that has language specifically in it to look at the Havana syndrome cases and to understand it. It also has interesting, I don't know if you saw it, it also has language about UAPs and basically admonishing the Defense Department, saying, you guys have been dragging your feet, no more. Whistleblower language. There was also a situation where they want to go all the way back to 1947, they want all the Defense Department and the CIA, et cetera, to collect all the information around events that have occurred. They want all of, interestingly, the NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements, they want those all listed because the NDAs are associated to people, and that means they can start to name the people who have been involved. They want all of the information on the disinformation and the obfuscation that's been going on, and they want information about the medical harms that have occurred.
If we look at this Tucker Carlson interview that happened with the Stanford University professor, it gives one hope about the disclosure and this movement in which we might get in the mainstream media, the fact that we're not alone sometime in the future. These congressional hearings in which experiencers are going to testify before Congress, experiencers being people that were witness to UFOs and actually were physically affected by their proximity to these UFOs. Now, these experiencers are important, but it pains me to think that important whistleblowers like Carl Wolf are no longer around to also take part in these congressional hearings. Carl Wolf passed away in 2018. Just like John Mack was hit by a car, and this tragically ended his life. In 2018, Carl Wolf was also hit by a car when he was on his bike. And this is a very unfortunate loss. His family mourns his loss, as does the UFO research community.
Let's say we know all of these implications, and let's say it's 1960 and we know some of these things, right? Well, you think of the world back then. The world of 1960, no way would that world be ready for some of the intellectual realities of what we think we know now. Because actually our knowledge of this subject has gone way deeper in our era than it ever was in the past. In the past, you know, they're thinking like the day the Earth stood still. You know, men, maybe some women in spacesuits from another world in their metal spaceships have just arrived, and, you know, that whole thing. And that's how people were talking back in the 50s. That's what they thought. Or at least some of them were thinking along these lines. And that's clearly not, like, we're well past that. Whatever the reality of this is, this phenomenon signifies a reality that is mind-bending, that we're gonna have to make some adjustments. So let's say back in 1960, we've got some inkling of this. And we have to ask ourselves, what the hell do we do with this information? And how could we ever get the public up to speed on this? And if we were to really think seriously about that, we would realize this will take generations. This cannot happen right away. There's no way. No way.
I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to folks that have been following us on this journey that Apollo 12 has many of the examples of anomalies, structures on the moon, and UFOs that we will also see in later moon missions.